Hello everyone and welcome to a tips and tricks strategy guide to the weird and wonderful MMO game Agar, or agar.io. The name Agar itself comes from a substance that is used to cultivate cell growth in laboratories and has an obvious tie to the game with its consuming blobs resembling cells and viruses on a cellular level. The game itself was launched on April the 28th, 2015 and within a few weeks has become very popular. But enough about that, let's dive into some tips and tricks and start off with a few basic pointers about the game. If you have fired up the game before, you'll know that to play you need to point in the direction you want your blob to move, and that moving over the tiny cells will consume them and help grow your blob. The bigger you get, the slower you move, but you are also larger, so collecting the tiny cells becomes a little bit easier, and they also reappear across the map throughout the game. Also keep in mind the bigger you get you will also shrink. This means in the later stages of the game you can only realistically continue to grow by consuming other players, and to do so you will need to be a 10% larger than them to do that. As well as moving around, you can also perform two moves. Spacebar will split your blob, or other blobs, in half, a move useful later in the game, but note that the blob will split in the direction that you are pointing and will fire out in that direction. Pressing W will fire out little blobs of your mass, making you smaller. This is most commonly used in turn with a virus. This green thing right here is a virus, and when you're smaller you can actually go inside the virus, a very useful tip from hiding from larger players, because when you're bigger than the virus it will actually become harmful and split your blob into smaller pieces. And this is how firing your mass can be used with the virus. If you shoot 7 blobs into the virus, it will shoot out a virus in the same direction, and this can be used to destroy larger blobs. So just a few more things to mention before we get into strategy. You can be split up into multiple pieces, but 16 is the maximum amount of blobs you can have at once. After splitting up, you can rejoin by moving your blobs towards one another. This can be done by moving the mouse into the center of your blobs. However, you will need to bear in mind that there is a cooldown time, so it cannot be done immediately after splitting. And last of all, you can split your blob to consume another player. Your split blob will need to be 33% larger than the blob you are trying to consume. This is different from when you are a single blob, in which case you only need to be 10% larger. So let's talk strategy. The early game is a relatively simple one. You're going to try to grow and stay alive, and to do so is relatively apparent. Swim around consuming cells and grow your blob whilst dodging the larger players. Keep in mind the viruses. In the early game they are your friends. Of course you can hide inside them from the larger players on the map. And as you grow and progress towards the mid-game, you'll start to see your blob slowly shrinking. At first not by much, but then it will become apparent that you need to attack other players to grow further, and this is where we reach the mid-game. The mid-game is a time for aggression. You'll find smaller targets are too fast for you to catch up with, and the bigger players can split to consume you if you get too close. Your best strategy is to seek out viruses and lure larger players towards them. If you are patient, the opportunity will present itself to fire at a virus and project it into a larger player, and that's when you want to swoop in and take the blobs for your own. A few successful attempts at this and you may find yourself on the leaderboard. The late game is an interesting one. Once you're on the leaderboard, you'll find you are too big for a lot of the blobs in your area, and as long as you stay away from viruses, you're going to be relatively safe. The problem is, you're going to always be shrinking, and this means you need to consume other players to grow, as the cells just aren't enough to sustain growth. Shooting at viruses may seem like a good strategy, but the reality is it means your opponent is on the opposite side and you are too big and slow to maneuver around and consume their blobs. At this stage of the game, the split attack is your best move. Wherever a smaller player gets too close to you, you have the opportunity to use the split attack and consume them instantly. A few successful moves at this and you could find yourself at the top of the leaderboard. Pulling this off though isn't as easy as it sounds, and now I'll leave you with a few final tips. The best way to avoid being consumed by a larger player is to strafe away from them. If you move in a straight line away from a larger blob, you will be in its path when it splits. If you are strafing, it will require the player to aim in front of you with a lot of accuracy. And last of all, if you are being pursued by a larger player than you, you also have the option to split into smaller pieces to move fast and avoid them. However, this can leave you vulnerable. And just like splitting to get away from another player, you can also shoot your mass out in front of you and consume it back into yourself while getting a little speed boost from the reduced size. Also, wherever you are in the game, it's always a good idea to head into areas with lots of cells, and if you have just started a new game, you could split up to move around quicker since the time spent is minimal. And my last tip is to focus on having fun. It's easy to get frustrated with addictive games like this, so if ever the game becomes stressful, just take a break and come back to it at another time. And that is it for this tips and tricks strategy guide. I hope you found the information useful, and if you want to support this video, please consider leaving a thumbs up, and if you have any tips of your own to share, leave them in the comment box down below. But that is it from me at this video, so as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.